Bread is one of the simplest staple foods out there, but the United States has still managed to mess it up in a lot of ways. Stick around to learn exactly how countries in Europe and Asia have managed to get a yeasty leg up on America. Preservatives in foods are common, but should we be okay with them lurking in our bread? Not necessarily. If you're making and eating it right, bread shouldn't need preservatives. All you need is wheat flour, yeast, water, and salt, and that's all you'll find in some of the best breads in the world. The Le Décret Pain law in France, issued in 1993, declares that baguettes must only contain those 4 ingredients. But if preservatives aren't necessary in bread, why do we find them there? Preservatives work to ensure that our food stays safe and shelf-stable. There are many preservative types, and each can be added at different stages of food making to ensure the product turns out and stays as desired. Though some may arguably be necessary, they might also have negative effects on our health when consumed in excess. Worries exist over possible carcinogens, and many individuals are allergic to certain preservative types. Preservatives may prove helpful, but they aren't necessary when bread is freshly cooked and eaten promptly. This is the way that bread is best enjoyed, much like it is in the many boulangeries or bread shops commonly found in France. Nevertheless, the use of preservatives like calcium propionate continues to show up in bread ingredient lists in the States, and unless some new legislation is passed, that isn't going to change anytime soon.
He said my bread was stale.
Well, it is pretty stale, Reggie.
That's 'cause I buy day-old bread!
Sugar is often found in American bread, and usually it isn't in high amounts. In a single slice of generic white bread, you might find 2 grams of sugar or less, which makes for a total of 4 grams in a standard sandwich. Though this may be the case with a lot of bread on the shelf, don't expect it to be the case with all of them, especially the specialty types. Bread made with oat, cinnamon, and potato will often deliver a sugary blow to your system. Some bread types, like Pepperidge Farm's home-style oat, deliver 8 grams of added sugar per 2 slices. High fructose corn syrup is another common offender, even though it's a little less common to find it in bread nowadays. Is this the norm in other countries? Not quite. The Le Décret Pain law prevents French bread from being loaded with sugar, and the loaves available in places like Australia taste much saltier compared to those in America. It's no stretch to conclude that gobs of sugar and high fructose corn syrup aren't needed to bake delicious-tasting bread. Bleached flour may be advantageous in several ways, but it's ultimately an unnecessarily processed grain. Unlike its unbleached counterpart, bleached flour undergoes a process in which its bran and germ are removed. The remaining product is then treated using chemical agents, but this isn't only for looks, as some may assume. Bleaching actually helps expedite the aging process, which primes the bread to get it ready for baking. So what's the big issue with the bleaching process? A lot, unfortunately. Aside from the concerning chemicals used like potassium bromate, which is banned in several countries, stripping the natural wheat grain of its germ and bran gets rid of nutrients that are vital to human health. Protein, niacin, and folate are all ousted in the name of faster aging dough. Instead, chemically bleached flour lacks nutrients, but still looks fluffy and white at the very least. All in all, buying bread that utilizes unbleached flour will be your best bet when selecting a loaf. Though it still won't be the same as freshly baked bread at home, it will at least contain nutrients you wouldn't otherwise get from Snow White store-bought Wonder Bread. Like almost anything mass-produced, bread in America has taken a hit. Most bread is no longer made in small batches, in which attention to detail is a must. Instead, bakers of store-bought bread use machinery, additives, sugar, and all sorts of industrial resources to make bread that tastes good to the average American. But is that how bread is supposed to be? Take your average white bread slice. It looks different from a warm, fluffy baguette that you'd grab from your local bakery. The crumb on the processed bread is tightly packed, comes in a pre-sliced loaf, and is loaded with unnecessary ingredients. Mass production makes it possible to satisfy the ongoing demand for bread, making it both convenient and possible for customers to grab from the store. But true artisan bread requires proper fermentation and an overall attention to detail that yields a completely different result.
All this for a loaf of bread?
Obviously, spending money at the local bakery once or twice a week isn't exactly feasible for many people. Mass-produced bread is an understandable purchase if you need something cheap and convenient, but nothing compares to fresh bread that's been handmade with care. Almost any bread you find in the grocery store aisle is far from fresh-baked. Some brands, like Sara Lee Artigiano, may laughably attempt to give the illusion of steam by artistically fogging up the bag, but in reality, those pre-sliced loaves were probably baked days ago. They're also likely to contain enough preservatives to keep them hanging on for at least another week in the pantry. In contrast, most fresh-baked bread will typically only last a few days at most. So what about the bread made by the in-store bakery? Even if you're lucky enough to have a specialized bakery in your local grocery, it's also usually loaded with additives you wouldn't normally find in true artisan bread. A quick scan of ingredients in the bread sold at Kroger and Walmart bakeries provides some insight into what exactly so-called fresh loaves are made out of. Additives like sodium stearoyl lactylate and dextrose make appearances along with other dough conditioners. Remember, there's nothing more you need to make bread than flour, salt, yeast, and water. Anything beyond that is an extra ingredient for taste or a preservative that's been added to improve its shelf life. In-store bakery bread from the local supermarket may seem like a safer buy, but it's likely not much better than what you'd find in a standard bread aisle. It very well may have been made with a dough conditioner. So what is a dough conditioner anyway? Additives like sodium stearoyl lactylate are used to make dough easier to work with, while simultaneously giving the bread a softer, more enjoyable texture that makes it even more satisfying to bite into. It's quite likely that one was used to make the bread for the last sandwich you ate.
Just look at this. This sandwich is terrible.
Despite some perceived benefits, dough conditioners have garnered negative attention thanks to the effects they have on some individuals. One famous example, potassium bromate, is a conditioner that improves dough strength, but it's been banned in China and Europe because of potential cancer risk. Azodicarbonamide is another controversial addition that's become prohibited in Europe for a similar reason. Names of other commonly seen dough conditioners in bread include monoglycerides, diglycerides, calcium stearoyl lactylate, and datum. Although you'll often find bread loaded with these potentially threatening dough conditioners, there are also breads out there that don't contain them. Take a look at the ingredients list of your next store-bought loaf to see whether or not your favorite brand contains one of these controversial additives. Salty bread doesn't sound the most appetizing, but 2 slices of Walmart's Great Value Honey Wheat bread contain as much sodium as a small order of McDonald's fries. That's on the high end of the salt spectrum, but the level of added sodium in bread still often comes as a shock to some consumers. It's not limited to the United States either. The British government has also made strides in recent years to combat this very issue, but it's still an ongoing problem. So what's the deal with salty bread? Salt plays a very important role in bread making. It strengthens the gluten in the dough, regulates yeast fermentation, and provides amazing flavor. Of course, consumption of too much salt can have a gnarly effect on our health, especially in the long term. Risks for conditions like high blood pressure are increased, along with the possibility of kidney disease or stroke. Add an assortment of cured meats and salty dressings to your sodium-packed slices, and you've got a sandwich that probably won't make you feel great if you manage to eat the whole thing. Preservatives, sugar, dough conditioners, and excessive sodium are an awful lot of unnecessary bread ingredients. But the list doesn't end there. Additional additives include caramel coloring, partially hydrogenated oil, and soy, all ingredients you probably wouldn't put in your homemade loaf. So why should it show up in the bread you buy in-store? These ingredients may seem innocuous, but they have their ill effects as well. Caramel coloring is potentially carcinogenic, but it's still added when companies need a darkening agent to give wheat bread a more beautifully brown hue than it might have otherwise. Meanwhile, partially hydrogenated oils can increase the risks of heart attacks and stroke through the creation of trans fats. And while soy may not have attached to it the health risks some once thought it did, genetically modified versions of it still may pose a cause for concern, not to mention the fact that it may trigger allergies. Of course, these aren't the only ingredients to look out for when purchasing bread. Other offenders such as artificial colors, flavors, BHA, and BHT are unfortunately also known to show up in bread ingredient lists.
This weighs almost 5 pounds. You eat this, you put this in your body?
Bread. It has no yeast in it. That's bread. That's bread.
If you've ever analyzed the typical American diet, you have a good idea of how many bread products we all tend to consume in one day. Pancakes for breakfast, paninis for lunch, and a hot, juicy cheeseburger for dinner sums it up nicely. Don't worry, a little bread isn't likely to send your health into a tailspin, but it's a lack of variety that has the potential to do the most damage. Since bread is relatively cheap and convenient, it lends itself to meals that are easy to whip up, but likely don't provide much in the way of nutritional value. From grilled cheese to PB&J, bread serves its purpose of delivering particularly tasty and nostalgic American meals. But when our bodies need certain nutrients, it's important to mix things up a bit. When you're planning your meals, try scoping out options other than bread when you can. By switching up your diet little by little, you can start benefiting from the added nutrients in your typical meal, rather than settling for the bready status quo. Plastic-wrapped, sugary, and preservative-laden breads are readily available in American markets, but they aren't necessarily what the public craves. According to a survey by Tasting Table, Americans surprisingly prefer sourdough bread over other bread types, even though it's unlikely to be found in most American pantries. So what's the reason? It's impossible to know every single reason why most people buy pre-sliced white and wheat over sourdough varieties, but price has a lot to do with it. Sourdough bread, along with anything else from a local vendor, can't possibly hold a candle to regular store-bought white and wheat loaves as far as pricing goes.
You got any white bread?
Yes?
I'll have some toasted white bread, please.
You can get a whole loaf of bread for less than $2 at most markets, but higher quality sourdough and organic bread can cost double that or more. If you're ready to spend your hard-earned cash on quality bread, your local bakery is a good place to start. But understandably, the majority of folks will keep on buying what's cheap and readily available. That is, until they're given more options and opportunities to do otherwise.